Welcome to our conversation today. I'm Nikki.
And I'm Scylla.
And the topic that we are addressing today is bereavement. Bereavement, of course, affects all of us sooner or later. But for some people and for some couples, it's much harder. Maybe losing a child, maybe losing a parent at a very vulnerable moment. And knowing how to handle grief ourselves and knowing how to help someone else who is bereaved is not something some of us have ever learned. And it can put huge pressure onto a marriage. Today, we are talking to a couple who faced a double bereavement, and we're going to be talking to them about how they navigated those circumstances. Welcome, Simon and Hannah.
Hi there.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Great to see you.
It's really wonderful to have you with us today and that we can talk together about this subject of bereavement, which is a challenging subject for all of us to talk about. So thank you very, very much for being willing to do that. Let me just tell those who are watching a little bit about you first. So Hannah and Simon have been married for 14 years. They have 2 children. A little boy, Bear, who is 7, and a little girl, Bo, who is 2, nearly 3. And they live in London, and Hannah is a makeup artist, and Simon works in financial services. So that's the bare bones, but we would just love you to start by telling us about your own personal story and experience of bereavement.
I suppose our first major bereavement was when my mother died, which was back in 2011. It had been quite a rocky time, I suppose, in the years leading up to her death, because we were experiencing infertility. So actually, from the moment my mother was diagnosed until she died, we were going through kind of investigation stages and tests, and then eventually a round of IVF, which was successful and wonderful and brought my mum great joy in her last days. But she died kind of 10 days after we found out we'd had a successful round of IVF. And it was absolutely tragic, wasn't it? Like part of, we've always thought, was the news of the pregnancy what she needed to was that what she was waiting for? And once she found out, did she then think, okay, great, Hannah and Simon are sorted, I can go now. And then it was a matter of maybe days after my mother died that I then started bleeding, and eventually miscarried on the day of my mum's funeral. So we actually missed her wake, didn't we? Because we were at the hospital.
Yeah.
So I think that was challenging, because I suppose it was very confusing to know in moments of intense sadness what we were actually grieving. Were we grieving mummy? Were we grieving the baby? Of course we were grieving both. But yeah, that was our kind of first experience of bereavement.
And I mean, as you've described it, Hannah, huge levels of grief for you with your mother, and for you, Simon, losing your mother-in-law, but losing a baby that you had longed for. Just besides just the raw grief, can you think back and remember other emotions that were sort of surfacing during the time and then afterwards?
Well, I remember one specific kind of feeling and emotion on the night of the funeral of Hannah's mother. So we just got back from the hospital, having confirmed that we'd lost the baby, and we'd excused ourselves and had gone upstairs, and so we were sat on Hannah's bed in her mum and dad's house, and you could hear noise below. You could hear there was music, as often a funeral turns to kind of the joy of celebrating somebody, and we just weren't a part of it. And I I really remember this real sense of it felt like there was a trapdoor of our lives, and we were sat on that bed, and the loss of the baby, I think, was such a compounding factor in our grief. We lost Hannah's mother 6 days before, and then suddenly here, 6 or 7 days before, and suddenly here was us having this double blow of losing this, as you say, Nikki, this child that we'd longed for and waited for 3-4 years, and then having had the successful pregnancy, to suddenly lose it at such a moment. It really felt like there was this trapdoor that just opened, and it was as if every foundation in our life had just evaporated, and suddenly there was this absence beneath. And for me, it really felt like there was hope just kind of disappearing off into the distance. And it was this real kind of feeling of thinking that actually, do you know what, this is, our hope has gone. So that for me was a real emotion for this particular time.
But then other emotions were just anger, like anger that I've never really experienced before. Anger at life, anger at the medical professionals who couldn't save my mum, who couldn't save my baby. Irrational, but it was very much there. Irritability. I know it's not really an emotion, but it's a physical displaying, I think, of your grief. Confusion. Like, why? Like, why did mum have to get cancer after everything she'd been through? Why did she have to die such a horrid death when she was such a wonderful person? Why didn't the baby make it when all of this is going on? So just real, confusion, frustration that things hadn't worked out the way we'd hoped, frustration that people around us didn't seem to understand, disappointment in our circumstances, disappointment in people's responses, unfortunately. And then there were lots of emotions that I suppose that we felt towards each other, moments of real love and empathy for each other, and then conflict when maybe we weren't grieving in the same way, or weren't perceiving each other maybe to grieve in the way we expected or thought. So bereavement certainly throws up a lot of different emotions all at once.
And then a numbness as well. I think a numbness was something we both felt. I remember we're both Christians, and I remember being in church and being around people that we loved and doing something that was incredibly important to us and had been all our lives. And yet here we were feeling completely numb, completely unable to really feel kind of any closeness to any of our friends around us, but also to God, who again we love. And so that numbness was,
and guilt a big one as well, I think.
Sorry, say that again.
Guilt,
yes,
an emotion that we both struggled with. Guilt that we didn't do enough, guilt that we weren't around more. Were we not around more enough for mum? In trying to be there for mum, we'd kind of neglected our friendship circle, and had we not done that, would they have responded in a way that was better? Guilt that we'd possibly done something to stifle our baby's chances.
I mean, thank you for sharing that extraordinary spectrum of emotions. It'd be wonderful to ask you to talk about how did you cope with those very kind of, as you say, irrational at sometimes, other times very strong emotions in the kind of days, weeks, and then months afterwards. And I know, as you said, you both have a Christian faith. I'm sure your Christian faith made a difference. It'd be lovely to hear how you coped and how your faith was part of that.
I think we responded very differently. Firstly, I mean, do you want to go first and share maybe some of how you coped in those early weeks? Possibly,
yeah. I think practically coping, we just had to narrow everything right down. Like, almost, what is the bare minimum that we can do to function okay? So we pretty much just about managed work. So we'd do our jobs, come home, collapse. And that was about our capacity, which I think some friends found really confusing. And there was an expectation that we should be rallying and getting out there and seeing people and, you know, chin up, time to crack on. But we didn't have the capacity. I think as well, you know, when you're bereaved, it's exhausting feeling so heartbroken. So you're just tired. So you don't have the capacity. So yeah, we very much just had to minimize our what's the word, commitment,
capacity and commitments. Yeah.
Hannah, what about you?
Well, I think maybe the way I coped is more looking perhaps slightly longer term. I think Hannah's absolutely right. That's the short term. That's exactly how we coped. I think longer term, we both had very different responses. And I think as a bloke, my response was I'm kind of hesitant to say kind of typical of being a bloke, but I feel like I wasn't particularly connected with my emotions in that regard. It was something that I was the one who had to be strong. I was the one who had whose wife had just lost her mother, who was, besides me, maybe even before me, her favorite person in the world. Hopefully not, but she just lost someone incredibly important to her, and I was the person that should be strong for her and should be there to support her. And also, she just lost kind of her heart's desire of a baby, and again, I was somebody who wasn't able to help and save either of those two people. And as a man, you want to be that person that is there for the person you love and is able to fix things. We're great fixers, aren't we? And sometimes to our detriment. But I think I struggled to support her and really kind of connect with her emotionally. And I think whereas Hannah perhaps responded with her emotions much nearer the surface, I very much had my emotions much deeper beneath the surface. It wasn't to say that I wasn't grieving. It wasn't to say that I wasn't absolutely broken and in pieces. I was, but I just handled it slightly differently, and my emotions were way deeper. And I think that felt like quite an important thing with hindsight to recognize, is that actually Hannah often looked to me to feel the same things as her, and would often say, why aren't you feeling this? Like, why are you not sad? And I don't know if you ever verbalize it like that, but I certainly felt like she felt those questions. And it, I guess, to anyone who's going through this with a partner, you do go through these things very differently. I don't think it's to say necessarily that the other person isn't feeling it if you don't feel that they're going through it. They almost certainly are, but they probably are processing it in a very different way. And I think one of the ways I began to process it was almost by trying to control the things I could control. So I just had some things in my life become incredibly uncontrollable, i.e. losing these loves of your life. And actually I sought to do things that I could control. So I got into things like triathlon and went down a route of doing things like Ironmans, which are kind of these endurance, long distance triathlons. And I really buried myself in that. And it became this kind of focus of my attention and focus of my energy. And I think, again, Hannah would see me disappearing on a bike for hours. And maybe hours. I'm not
bitter about it at all.
but I think that was my way of coping. And I just wonder whether there was a bit of a halfway house where actually if I had tried to express a bit more, maybe step out of my comfort zone in expressing my emotion. And again, perhaps if Hannah had met me a bit closer and understood that I was just processing it differently, we might have had a slightly easier, immediate couple of years after.
We were going to ask you, if you could talk to your former selves now, go back 9 years, what advice would you give to yourselves, and of course to any other couple, in terms of when you're grieving differently? Anything else you'd say that would help to support each other? Hannah, what would you say to that?
I would say be kind to each other, and try and be aware that we all grieve differently. I think my expectation was that if if you weren't crying on the floor, then you weren't feeling anything, because that's the only way I knew how to express my grief. And I think in turn, I have to acknowledge that I was probably quite unpleasant to Simon, because I didn't understand. So kindness can go a really long way, and then patience, because there's no rule book or no, one set journey that you travel down as you're grieving. It can look very, very different, and you just need to be patient with each other as you both, in your own way, muddle through coping as best you can.
And I know that for both of you, about 3.5 years after your bereavement, with your losing your mum and your baby, you actually went on the marriage course, and we just wondered, how did that help you as a couple process? And I mean, obviously, there's a bit of time between them dying and then you coming, but it'd be good to hear how that helped.
I just wish we'd done it sooner.
I wish we'd done it sooner.
Well, it gave us time and space to talk. We'd never really been in that kind of setting before, but things that were really transformative, that's a big word, but I suppose it's true, was the art of listening session. I think we realized that we hadn't really listened to each other for years, and I'm aware I jump in, but I wasn't aware quite how much I jump into conversation. So it was really eye-opening, and I think since then we've been much better at talking to each other. We were able to air, in a safe space, a lot of the things that we had felt over the recent years. After Mum died and we lost the baby, we then lost 2 more subsequent pregnancies. So it's kind of like the grief, as soon as we felt like we were getting together again, it happened again, and it was this awful cycle for a while. But we were able to air some of the areas where we felt let down or whatever, in a space where I wasn't going to get upset and start crying and shouting, because I couldn't, because we were in a public-ish place, which was great.
Thank goodness for that. No, but it's amazing. I think it's amazing how if you don't address something, time doesn't necessarily improve it. And I guess I'll maybe contextualize that a little bit. I think so. This happened in 2011, and again, some subsequent miscarriages and kind of traumas. And I don't think we ever really stepped back and addressed our marriage. And these events have a really huge impact on how you relate to each other as a couple. And actually, I think time had just compounded probably bad habits. It compounded poor communication. It compounded going through things in different ways and not really talking about it. And actually, the marriage course was for us a bit of a lifeline. Actually, I think we probably got to a place where we actually needed some external help, and it was an incredibly refreshing experience. And I think actually we worked out we liked each other again, which was which is maybe a bit of a joke, but there's a lot of truth in that. And I think you suddenly realize, wow, like this is underneath all those layers of grief and all those layers of everything that comes with it, and all the noise and the clutter and the weight that comes with each of these experiences, which it does. There was a really treasured relationship there, and I think the marriage course just helped us find that again.
That is lovely to hear. We know from talking to you that going back to church was difficult. Hard to be in a group of people who are celebrating. But it would be great just to hear, what did other people do, perhaps at the time when your grief was really raw and in the weeks or months ahead after that was helpful to you? Helpful, maybe little things they said, things they did, or equally things that were really inappropriate that people said.
Do you want me to go first?
Go on then.
Go on then. Okay. So that's communication in action.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Nikki, you're absolutely right. I think going back to church after the loss was actually quite a tough thing. I think some couples may find it's if you have a faith, it's the place that you cling to and becomes your kind of source of support. I think we just found it. Churches can be an incredibly joyous place, and I think we were in a place where we were very sore and very raw, and so it felt quite painful being there. And I think maybe briefly before I answer on what people said that was helpful, one thing that really sticks with me is that with my faith, I think not only was I kind of angry at the situation, and there was, Hannah talked about all the emotions that we went through. Not only was I angry at the situation and lots of aspects of it, I was also incredibly, I think, cross with God. He was someone I had a strong faith in that I felt incredibly let down by. And I think there were so many points in the immediate aftermath, the kind of months and weeks and months that followed, where everything in me wanted to do this kind of about turn and walk off in the opposite direction to my faith and to God, and actually say, look, God, I don't want anything more to do with you. Honestly, you've let me down. This is too much sadness, too much pain, and I just want to turn around, and I never want to see you again. And I think there was so much of me that wanted that, but actually there was this kind of niggling knowledge that actually I mean we're Christians, and so for us Jesus is an incredibly important person actually, and there was this sense of, look, I know Jesus is true. I know he truly lived. He really died. And I believe he rose again. And actually there was this sense of, if I turn around and I do that about turn, I will forever live with this feeling that I'm turning my back on something I know is true. And for me, that was quite a strong sentiment throughout that whole period following. And I'd say to some extent still today. We're almost 10 years on from this, but actually it's still something I feel today, where sometimes I think, do you know what, this is too painful. It comes back and you think, I don't want any more of this. But actually there is that sense of, do you know what, no, this is true, I can't turn my back on it. But I think that maybe gives you a sense of maybe how our faith helped. But there was one particular act that really stuck by me, which was of the vicar of our church. I think he probably sensed that we were struggling to adjust back in. And actually we had this strong sense of, again, in those months that followed, this sense of this grey cloud being very much just above the surface of our heads, and this inability almost to operate outside of ourselves. And our vicar kind of rang our doorbell one day, completely out of the blue, hadn't texted or called to say he was coming. And he just turned up with this lemon drizzle cake that he'd made that afternoon. And he just dropped it around and he said, look, you guys are really important. Just know that we love you. Here's a cake just for you guys to enjoy. It might seem like a really small thing, but actually it felt like, these clouds above, it felt like this hand kind of reaching into our existence and just being a bit of a lifeline.
That's a wonderful story. Hannah, I'd love to ask you something. I remember many years ago when some friends of ours were in a similar situation to you. They had lost a 9-month-old baby. And I remember seeing her after about 6 months. And it was the first time I'd seen her. And I was completely paralyzed. I didn't know what to say. And I didn't say anything. And she was so lovely. And after a year, she said to me, you know, it was very difficult when we met that first time, and you didn't even mention our daughter. And I was so grateful to her for saying that to me, because I just didn't know what to do. And I'd love to ask you, because I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'd love to ask you, what would you say to someone in my position, to people who were around you at the time when you were grieving? What were the things that you would suggest somebody can do? I love the lemon drizzle, the action, that the kind of action is an amazing thing, and thinking like that, but words and the support that really enabled you to go forwards.
I think acknowledgement is all you really crave, actually, at the time, because you're experiencing something so life altering and so huge in your world that someone just acknowledging that you're grieving or having a hard time is all you really want. So even if the words are, Hannah, I do not know what to say, but I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you lost your mum. I'm so sorry you lost your baby. That's all you want. So what words, acknowledging your loss, I think, is all you want, whatever that looks like. I think just, an apology, a hug if it's appropriate or if it's allowed. And then I think what so naturally trips off the tongue is, you will let me know if there's something I can do, won't you? But actually, that's a very lost, empty sentiment, because it puts all the pressure on the grieving person to try and think of something, a physical act that someone can do that will make them feel like they're helping you. And again, when you're grieving, you don't have the capacity to think or try and help other people feel good that they're helping you. Does that make sense? So it's the kind of don't let what you can't do get in the way of what you can do. No one could bring my mum back. No one could bring the baby back. No one could make my heart whole again in that moment. But they could drop round a lemon drizzle cake, or they could send a text message. Unsolicited communication was wonderful in a time when I didn't feel I could ask. I'm no fun to be around. I know that no one's going to want to go for a walk with me because I'm so, I'm boring at the moment. I'm just sad. I might cry again. I don't want to cry again. So I just won't see that person, or I won't reach out. So my advice to other people, if friends of yours are grieving, is just keep plugging away. I had a friend get offended that she didn't tell me for years that she felt a card she had written had gone unacknowledged. And the problem is, I don't remember the card to this day, but again, it's your capacity, and things like your short-term memory does go when your body is desperately trying to function when you're hurting so much. So just because you send a card or a message and it's not responded to, don't stop. Just keep going and just keep reaching in.
And Hannah's amazing at that now, actually. When we have only through experience, but when we have friends who go through traumas or bereavement, Hannah is the person who's still texting kind of months afterwards. She remembers the anniversaries, she remembers the birthdays of the people they've lost, etc., etc. And she, I think, from her own experience of the text messages stop at some point. It's like the kind of the press leave town, right? And suddenly you're on your own, you're in the quietness of your own home, and the support kind of goes, the immediate support goes, actually, you need people to carry on and keep taking that initiative. And it's the opposite to what people naturally do. If you think people, they skirt the topic, when actually they should just hit it head on. They say, what can I do to help? When actually, just knock on the door and offer to do some laundry or clean the house or whatever it might be. Those are the practical things. Make a meal. Those are the practical things, I think, that make a real difference.
Much helpful advice from both of you. Thank you. I know that will help anybody who is listening to this. Can I ask, in terms of reaching out for help to others, grief on the one hand is such a private thing, it's so personal to you as a couple. And yet, what would you say in terms of reaching out, whether it's to other people, to an organization, in terms of seeking help with your grief?
We both did eventually seek professional help. You because you developed some anxiety. I was diagnosed a couple of years later with post-traumatic stress disorder. So we both reached out eventually for professional help. What we didn't do at the time was reach out to either, bereavement services that are available locally, or it didn't feel like there was such an online support presence back then, but I'm aware there's loads now, whether it's through social media or just, through Google. And even with friends, part of it was our capacity and part of it was I'm not wanting to burden others. But I think now looking back, people did want to help, they didn't know how. So actually, I wish we'd been a bit braver at sometimes just saying, we're a right mess today. Things aren't going to get better potentially if we just stay in this moment. Is there any chance you could pop round even just for 10 minutes? So I wish we'd been better at that. And I'd encourage people now who are grieving to do that, because I think your loved ones will really want to help. You won't be burdening them.
Maybe that's something just in hindsight that, again, if it's not necessarily a joint bereavement, and I know ours is a kind of a mixed thing, whereas part of it was joint and part of it was more on Hannah's side. Maybe that's something that the opposing partner can do. And so perhaps me in that state of wanting to be that strong one, maybe that's something I could have been better at, of actually being the one that reaches out and says, friends, we need your help, and this is how you can help. And actually, I think you feel too raw in the moment, but perhaps that's something to do.
And just as we kind of come to a close, it'd be wonderful to go back to your marriage relationship, and again to sort of with hindsight now, how could you, going through those early weeks and months where you felt like this cloud was here and you were just struggling to survive, how do you think you could have each supported the other? I mean, Simon, you said you just kind of completely threw yourself into this triathlon, going for it on the kind of exercise front. And was there something that Hannah could have done to kind of get through to where you were, to help you process kind of the whole thing together, in more of a kind of out there way? Was there something, Hannah, that Simon could have helped you with in some kind of way?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure if this is a helpful answer, but one thing that the marriage course highlighted to us, I think it was even on the first evening, was you fill out, there's one of the exercises you do where you talk about things that you enjoy doing on your own, things that you enjoy doing together. And I think we really struggled on that section. For me, it was, yes, I was very much in it that year, wasn't I? That was a big year for me with triathlon 2017. So for me, that was my own interest. Yes, this is what I love doing. And as I thought about what made me happy, that was it. I think for you, it was a bit more complex, because part of Hannah's joy is makeup, but actually that's her job. And so there's this kind of blurred line. Is that my job or is that my passion? It's probably a bit of both. But then we got to the section where it said, what do you enjoy doing together? And it was a bit embarrassing, actually, because there was a real absence. And I think that was a big alarm bell to us. And so not from our own experience of having done this well, but from our experience of looking back with hindsight and thinking what we could have done better, I think we could have found things that we could have done together that, again, took us slightly off topic. Again, you want things that are going to allow you to have fun, maybe experience a laugh, maybe experience a bit of joy together. And that, whatever that could be, playing tennis together. We played tennis together on our wedding anniversary this year.
Great.
for the first time.
In
It
the
was
rain.
in the rain. It
Brilliant.
was, it was real kind of soul food, and it was like, oh yeah, we have fun together.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said there. Find something that you both enjoy and you can do that maybe takes you slightly away from your immediate circumstances.
Yeah.
One thing. I don't know. Do you have anything that you?
No, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah,
No, it's
amazing.
It's 9 years since you lost your baby and since your mum died. And the question we love to ask is, has time helped with the healing? I think you've intimated already it's not time alone, it's these other things that you need to do. But what would you say in terms of just the process of time?
And the process of grieving, and that you go through a process of grieving.
Time definitely helps. I still don't think you should say that to someone who's very recently bereaved. You'll get better with time. Will it now? You know, that's one of the
have you gone
really? That's one of the comments that made me feel murderous at the time. But no, time does help. I mean, like, you know, my family as I knew it will never be the same again. It irreparably changed. And I still mourn that. I mourn what my family used to be.
You mourn the future. That you were
celebrations
for
are never the same because there's always a huge thing missing. Yeah. So life is very, very different, and things can happen daily that still make me feel sad. I feel sad that she's not here. I feel sad that I can't celebrate moments with her, that she doesn't get to, you know, she never got to meet my children, and they would have loved her. And oh gosh. So,
and Hannah, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Would you say it's helpful for you to articulate that to Simon now? To say, oh, if only Mum was here, I would love to, I'm feeling sad. And that helps.
Yeah, so I think there are certainly times when I'm feeling sad or missing Mum that it would be helpful if I just said, oh gosh, I wish Mum was here today, or I wish I could have told Mum about that. But that all-encompassing, overbearing grief and pain that you feel initially, it does eventually subside, and it becomes a very different kind of pain management, I suppose. And I love the analogy of kind of a boat. I might get this wrong, but you know, your first time sailing a boat through rough waters can be absolutely terrifying, but the sea's always going to be a bit rough. But the more experience you have, the better you get at steering that boat.
A very, very helpful analogy.
There you go.
Simon and Hannah, thank you so much for talking to us today. We're really grateful for you just talking about, well, what's happened, how you have navigated these painful circumstances. But thank you so much. Yeah,
and as we said at the beginning, it's a challenging subject to talk about, but you have articulated so many personal kind of emotions and experiences. But we know it will be incredibly helpful to the people who are listening to this conversation. So thank you for being so open and so honest and so real with us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.